Um, I just want to start by giving you a sense of water issues generally in Alberta. Alberta has about 2% of the renewable freshwater resources in Canada. And we have what's often called the 80-20 problem, which is that while 80% of water is in the north of the province, 80% of the population is in the south of the province. So this obviously causes a problem. The demand for water in the province is going to increase about 21% by 2025. A good chunk of that will be because of population growth and the use of municipal water. Some of it will be due to the agricultural sector using more water. A big piece that a lot of us are worried about is that the petroleum sector will be doubling their use in the coming decades. You can see some of the numbers there of combined and planned upgraders are going to consume about 10 times the water currently used by the city of Edmonton when they're all sort of on stream. And tar sands operations, which I'm sure all of you are at least somewhat familiar with, when the planned ones that are through the pipeline, sort of appropriate term, will use about 2.5 times the water used by the city of Calgary. So we are really going to be the first province hitting serious levels of water scarcity, and we have to deal with it. Like most provinces, we have an allocation system. That's kind of the good news, that it determines how and who can use water and how much and from where. Unfortunately, it's based largely on a system that was put in place just before the turn of the last century, when the whole deal was, let's settle the West, and they figured that a good way to settle the West was to make sure that farmers had access to water. So that's the basis of the system we still have, which is what's called FITFR, or first in time, first in right. And what that basically says is, if you have a license that is older than another license, you have the right to draw all of your allocation, if you want it, before the next person has any rights to theirs. So someone who got a license in 1894 has more right to water than someone who got a license in 1984. The province doesn't give water to users, it gives them the right to use water. So when we're talking about water rights, that's what we're talking about. The province giving a license saying you can take so much water out of a given water body. They're not actually giving away the water. Century, there have been a couple updates. One was in the 30s, and the most recent was in 1999, where we passed what's the Water Act, and that is now the system that is governing allocations in the province. And just to give you some sense, there are about 9.5 billion cubic meters of water allocated in the province of Alberta, and those are through the 8 watersheds that run through Alberta. Again, most of it is in the south of the province, so the North Saskatchewan and the South Saskatchewan river basins, which are the yellow and blue basins, account for the vast majority of allocations in the province. Again, because of FIT for older licenses have priority, there are about 20,000 licenses in the South Saskatchewan river basin, and about 20 of them control almost 3/4 of the water. Most of those are the irrigation districts that sort of supply water for irrigation. And the other important thing to point out is that while all this is allocated, not all of it is used. So one example is the North Saskatchewan River Basin, where there's been 2 billion cubic meters allocated, but only 0.19 of that is actually used. So there is obviously a big gap between what is allocated and what's actually being drawn out and not returned. And the amount of water you have to leave in the river to keep it healthy has historically not really been fully taken into consideration in the allocation system, which led to the South Saskatchewan River Basin actually being over-allocated. The North Saskatchewan is heading in the same direction. There's also no real prioritization of basic human needs, and because of the FIT-FIR system, you have a situation where a lot of the smaller, newer municipalities in the south are facing water shortages in the coming decades. Yeah, and especially in dry years. So in the 1999 Water Act, they introduced this idea of water transfers. So before the Water Act came into being, it was very hard to transfer a license you had to another user. The 1999 Water Act said that was okay, and they sort of had a process put in place. But nobody really used it because you're not going to pay for something that you can get for free from the government. So it really wasn't used, even though it was on the books. Until 2006, when the government placed a moratorium on new water licenses in 3 of the rivers of the South Saskatchewan River Basin. They were over-allocated. It was probably a good move. But what this did was it overnight created a water market, because any new development on those basins suddenly had to get their water from people who already had allocations and licenses to draw out of it. So a water market was created. Since then, there's been about 28 water transfers, so people selling the unused portion of their water allocations to another user so that they can draw water out of one of those 3 rivers. Obviously, this is problematic on a number of levels. You're commodifying a resource that is part of the commons. You are now selling licenses which the government gave out for free, so you've turned a free resource given out in the public interest to a commodity which you can now profit off of. Social environmental needs are largely left up to the market, so even if something like fish stocks is valued more than watering a golf course, if the market decides that watering the golf course is the better use of that money, then that's where the water will flow under a market system. And you have the situation where municipalities, small farmers, First Nations compete with industry for those allocations. There's only so much, and they're going to go to the highest bidder in a market system. A tiny little municipality, a town, can't compete with a tar sands operation or a major commercial operation. There's also the problem of what's called sleeper rights, which is, for instance, in the North Saskatchewan River Basin, you have 1.8 billion cubic meters of water that basically are unused, but people have the rights to. So a market system could actually, ironically, since it's supposed to sort of lead to efficiencies in water use, it's conceivable that it could actually lead to more water use because all these unused allocations are all of a sudden on the market and being given out to other users. There's some concerns as well about large-scale transfers, what the impact the market might have. There's a couple examples that sort of show some of the problems. The best one is the Balzac development, which is just north of Calgary. They wanted to build this idea of a horse racing casino, all awesome things under one roof. But they needed water, so they came up with a plan to get an allocation from the Red Deer River, build a big pipe, and pipe it 200 kilometers down to feed the golf course. There's a lot of public opposition, especially in Red Deer, who said, why on earth would we give you our water when we're facing increasing water scarcity? And it actually got scuttled, and the commercial development ended up buying the water they needed from the Western Irrigation District instead. But again, it shows that this is something that could happen, like pretty serious movement of water between different areas. The other big piece through this is to move the use of water through the market up to higher value uses. So in a couple of the main reports, it talks about most valued water use, higher value uses, which of course raises the question of what do they define as a higher value use? Because it could be this, right? A small scale organic farmer who needs water for organic carrots that are locally grown. It could also be this, which is the water that's needed for the tar sands. 3 to 4 barrels for each barrel of oil that gets pulled out. And there is a footnote in one of the reports that explains exactly what they're talking about when they say high value uses, which is one that increases the GDP. This is where we're going. We're expanding this thing, we're removing a lot of the regulation, and we're compelling everyone, including public bodies who want access to water, to get it in the market. So it's very problematic. Again, the recognition of water as a human right enshrined in law is very important because it would take it largely out of the market. And this idea of the public trust doctrine, that the government, the role of government is to protect the public water for use in the public interest, and you would be able to put environmental concerns, public interest concerns, basic human needs above commercial needs in a public trust